Hello, everyone, and welcome to another lesson. Today is going to be a lot of information. It really is. I suggest you break it up into segments as best you can and maybe spend 15, 20 minutes, practice some of the stuff, and make sure that you know what was just discussed, and then move on to the next 20 minutes and so on and so forth, because there is a lot of Google tools that we're going to be utilizing in this very same lesson. It's going to be under the guise of Google Classroom, and I know many of you are familiar with Google Classroom already and have been getting better at it. So we are going to talk about it a little bit, but everything else is kind of going to be connected within Google Classroom, because this is assuming that you're going to be having a Google Classroom of your own during the school year. Now, if you don't have your own Google Classroom, you can still do a lot of this stuff. It'll just be slightly different, and you might have to pick and choose some of the things that you do, especially for younger grades. But specifically down below, you'll see like the interactive lessons can still be important for younger grades. Using Google Forms and feedback is still going to be important. So definitely bear with me and try to break this up or watch this video multiple times so that way you don't miss something, and discuss it with somebody else that was taking this course as well to make sure that everything that can be gleaned from this can be. And there's probably stuff that I'm not even thinking of putting in here. So go ahead and give me that feedback as well and say, hey, have you considered doing this? And share that in the Google Classroom stream, as you guys have already been doing, sharing your Google sites. Go ahead and share your comments right there. So we're going to start off today, and we're going to work under the assumption that you need some form of online work in your classes. Now, this does not mean you have to be fully digital. This does not mean that you have to have a class that is fully virtual remote learning. You could do all of this stuff with still having a physical in-class classroom, especially if your class, like our high school, is one-to-one and there's devices there. Now, we're going to talk about some of those implications as well, but we're going to start off by just saying the basics of Google Classroom here. It's essentially an online space to collect and assign work. That's essentially what it is. It doesn't replace a learning management system, but as you guys have been seeing, I can put different topics and units right in here. We've already learned how you can add images and like these little emojis to make it pop a little bit more. We've talked about things like that, and you could have different types of assignments, and it's my way of assigning work to you guys and then collecting that work and giving it a grade, but I could also leave feedback on it as well. And so if you are new to Google Classroom or need a little bit of a refresher, there is a lot of information on my YouTube channel. If you just type in my name in Google Classroom, you'll see a ton of assignments come up. Like if I go to YouTube and I were to type in Michael Krauszer Google Classroom, and I go ahead and search for that, you can see a lot of videos of Google Classroom that show up there. You could also search my channel, and it just gives you some of the basics and the tutorials for Google Classroom, so I'm not going to spend too much time doing that. But what I will say is the basics of Google Classroom here is if you go to classroom.google.com and you want to create a new class yourself, all you have to do in the right-hand side is hit the plus sign, and you're going to go ahead and hit Create Class. And you do that, and you type in the information. It's going to ask for a section, all of that, all of the information, the year, anything that you want there. Now, once you're in the Google Classroom, you want to populate a roster, right? You want your actual students to be in there. And how you would do that is you'd go to the People tab up at the top, and this is where you can see any teachers and any students in the class. As we can see here, we have a bunch of students in this one. And if I wanted to add, there is a little person symbol and a plus sign. You could add co-teachers who have the same editing rights as you, or for you guys to add students, you would click on the invite students and go ahead and type in their email. Now, if all of your students happen to be in the same domain as you, in our case for CCS it is, meaning if I were to start typing in a student's name right now or a teacher's name, their email address is going to come up because they're already in our system. So that is helpful. And if you have them already to copy, you could just paste them right in there as well. And then they will have to accept the invite of the class. And that's kind of how you populate a Google Classroom roster. Now, if you're not using Google Classroom, you could still do a class roster with other programs. If you recall, Google Groups is an email list of sorts. You can create a class roster in Google Groups. You could also do it in Google Sheets, which we haven't talked too much about, but I'm going to go ahead and show you. It's basically Google's version of Microsoft Excel. And I'm going to go ahead and hit blank document, and it's just a normal spreadsheet. And I could go ahead and add a class list here, and I could also input data of test scores and all of that, which we're going to look more into later on, not necessarily right now, of how you can really look at all of this data within a spreadsheet and kind of keep track of your class. So that's just the basics of creating class rosters and starting your class. Really simple. But Google Classroom and online work, you also need to be able to assign and share work as well. And Google Classroom allows you to do that. But if you're not using Google Classroom, you could share Drive folders. Remember, we talked about this earlier on in the course as well. If you go into your Google Drive and you want to share an entire folder, you can just go to your Drive. You can click on whatever folder you want to do. If you recall, we did EdTech Resources, and this is a shared folder. You can see the little person icon within the folder. And again, if you just right click on any one of those folders, you could hit share and it'll bring up the sharing options, and you can change it to where anyone on the internet with this link can edit, but a sign-in will be required. You can choose to share it with specific people. If you've set up a Google group already, you can just type in the name of that group and it'll show up, and then you can share it with that entire Google group, which is also helpful. Now, why would you want to do this though? Right? Well, there's a couple different reasons. If you are not using Google Classroom, you might want to share an entire Drive folder of assignments, of work. Let's imagine here I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to name it, let's just say, brain teasers. Maybe these are assignments that students can do maybe for extra credit when they are done with anything else, right? Or maybe at home to do extra work, whatever. And I want to make a little image to make it a little bit easier to see. So I'm using an add-on, as I've showed you guys before. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'll use this monkey. Right, brain teasers, I'm going to hit create, and it's going to create that folder for me. Now, what can I actually put in here? Well, if I click on it, I could create different files straight into that folder. So maybe I want to create a Google Doc, which is going to be a blank document, and maybe I'm putting an actual assignment. So I'll say BT for brain teaser number 1, and I'll put instructions for it and what they're supposed to do, and I can put in all that information. And why is this helpful? Well, if my students are in their Google Drive and they need some additional work to do or resources, whatever it is, they can just go ahead and click on that folder and they know, okay, I want to do brain teaser number 1 because I have nothing else to do right now. I finished something early, and then move on to brain teaser number 2, so on and so forth. And they could go ahead and download those right there. Just make sure that they can't edit those documents unless you want them to, but you can just give them viewing access to the folder by setting it up in that way. So just think in your own classes right now, how can you leverage Google Drive folders in this way to share assignments or share resources? Maybe you have resources of for a test, you know, your vocabulary words, or just fun assignments like word searches or something that you want them to be able to have. You could put those all into a folder. Maybe you want to make it more broad, and instead of naming something brain teasers, I'm going to rename it, and I'll just say, let's pretend I'm teaching grade 7. So I'm just going to put in grade 7, and now within that folder, I can create subfolders. So maybe I want to create a subfolder that is for extra help, and I have documents there for extra help. Maybe I want to create a folder for extra credit for at any time in the marking period. If they want to do something, they could do extra work. Maybe I want to put announcements somewhere and just have different files for announcements, or even just one document. But that way, when my students come to their Google Drive and they click on their grade 7 folder that was shared with them, they see anything that I put in here. So really think for yourself, how can this best be utilized for your class? Share that with them. You could share the folder with parents as well, especially for younger classes. So that's assigning and sharing work with Google Drive and sharing Drive folders. But in Google Classroom, you can do the same thing because Google Classroom allows you to create work. And when you're in Google Classroom and you click on classwork, you can then create an assignment, quiz question, question, material. You could reuse a post, so on and so forth. So when I click on an assignment, I could put in anything that I want, and I can say that this is a paper. I can choose the due date. I could choose the topic. I could differentiate by in the right-hand corner, clicking on all students, and I can click on and off certain students. So if I didn't want to assign it to somebody, I could just uncheck them. So that way nobody else sees it. So if you're differentiating your assignments, if you're doing something for an IEP, you could do it within Google Classroom, and then your entire class will get it immediately. Now, one thing to note that is important when you're sharing stuff through Google Classroom is the different options that come up. If I were to go ahead and let's just say I'm going to add a file from Google Drive, and I'm just going to add any random file right now. I'll add that brain teaser one, right? Notice that when I put that in here, it says students can view file. That's fine. That just means that they can see it. They can't make edits to it. I'm okay with that. Or you can choose students can edit file. Now, that is dangerous because this is your master copy. So if you have students can edit file, then guess what's going to happen? A student's going to open up that assignment, that Google Doc, and they're going to be able to change the entire thing. So very rarely will you want to do that. The only times that I have done it is if I'm doing a whole class discussion. I'll oftentimes in my AP class, I'll put AP discussion number 1, and I actually have them all discussing and putting answers down in one Google Doc together, so I do give them all editing access. But for the most part, in most of the assignments that I'm actually giving my classes, I'm choosing either they can view, because then they can make their own copy of it, or I just go a step further and I make a copy for each student. Some people don't like that because then you also get so many copies of this in your Google Drive, because once you assign something to a class, like right now, if I was to assign this to all of you and I say make a copy, it's going to show up in your Google Drive automatically, but it's also going to show up 20 sometimes in my Google Drive automatically, because each one is going to be a different document that you guys have that I also have access to because I am the one originating it, if that makes sense. So I don't really care about that because we have unlimited storage with Google Drive and I can hide things in folders. So I wouldn't worry about it if I were you, but just know that these 3 options are what sometimes confuses teachers the most. So just keep that in mind. Now, I do want to show you one thing. If I was to, I'm going to go out of this class and I'm going to go into a test class instead. Yeah, I'll go into this one. If I was to create an assignment and I'm adding a Google Drive link like I just was before, so I'm going to add that same document, and you have these 3 options. If I was to go ahead and put students can view file, and I'm going to post this right now, I'm going to assign it, and it's going to create that assignment for me. All of my students are going to be notified immediately. But now if I go back into it, and I'm going to hit edit with the 3 dots, and I want to change it from students can view. I meant to make a copy for them all maybe. Notice that option is no longer there. I've had a number of questions last year when we went digital of people doing that, where they create the assignment and they accidentally put students can view file or students can edit file, and then they want to go back in and change it to make a copy for all students. And then it turns out they can't do it. Well, that's because you can't make a copy if you've already created the original and assigned it to everybody. So Google Drive can't like retroactively make copies of the assignment. The thing that you would have to do now is just delete this assignment and create a new one and actually make a copy this time. Now, if you're wondering why in the world would you ever want to make a copy, what practical purpose does that serve? Well, let's imagine in this document I actually have I have the instructions listed here, but then I actually have questions like what is the best Google tool? And I'm giving them space to answer, and I skip around and I do number 2, what is the worst, right? And you want the students to be able to put their answer right in here, then that's why you would make a copy, because you're essentially giving them this worksheet to fill out. And that's why making a copy is helpful, because when a copy is made, the students own their version of it and they can put their answers right in there and then upload this document back. So it's your way of already formatting it for them uh, correctly. And it is identical to when you just make photocopies of a worksheet and give it out in your class. And it doesn't have to be a worksheet. It could be anything that you want to give in that regard. So just keep that in mind, that when you're assigning and sharing work in Google Classroom, these 3 options are important. Students can view, students can edit, and make a copy for each student. Normally it's going to either be view or make a copy. And remember, if you already create it and you don't give them a copy and then you try to go back in and fix that, it's going to be too late. You're going to have to delete that assignment and then do it again, which really doesn't matter. It is fine to delete an assignment. It's not going to kill any of the students. You will be okay. And so that's assigning and sharing work and creating class rosters. Now, moving on to something that's a bit more involved and a bit more meaty, and that's feedback. The reason why I really like digital learning, and that doesn't mean 100% digital learning, is because of feedback. I am able to provide more feedback, in my personal opinion, online than I would be able to in person to my class. And sometimes I could do it more efficiently and quicker than ever before. We really should be moving past the days where we assign a paper or we assign a task or an assignment, and then it takes us 1 to 2 weeks to grade and give the students feedback. Because you know what happens at that point? Students likely forget why they wrote what they did, or they're really just not involved in it, or why they answered a question of the way that they did. And I know that for myself. When I do work in grad school, or even when I was in my undergrad, if I was to write a paper and spend a lot of time on it, and then I don't get that paper back for a week or two, by the time I get it back and I see the feedback, I kind of forgot what I was thinking when I was writing it. So it's not as useful. Feedback is supposed to be as quick as possible. Sometimes you will need more time, practically speaking, but as often as we can, giving direct and quick formative feedback and quick summative feedback as well is going to be important. Now, you can do that within Google Classroom with comments. You can do comments within actual documents using private comments. So if I was to go into one of our previous class units, and let's just go into the app brainstorm, and I know that 11 people turned it in. I'm going to go ahead and pick on Erin and her math brainstorms here, and I'm going to go ahead and click on hers. Now, she had brainstormed using Google Slides, and she used Lori as a partner there, and I can go ahead and put a private comment right in here. So as you see, we already had a private comment, but if I see her work, I can add in a private comment specifically for her, telling her what I liked, what I think she could work on, so on and so forth. So in my case, being an English teacher, I could read a paper and I could say, okay, there's one big thing that you would need to work on, and it's this. So one thing to work on, boom. One thing that you did well, boom. And normally I start with positive stuff first too, but you can go ahead and do that. It could be quick, and only that student gets it because it's a private comment. But you could also give feedback on a class level. let's say that the entire class, when I assigned Google Sites, let's say the entire class was really struggling with one aspect of Google Sites. So what I can do after I grade everybody's is on the stream page, I could create an announcement for all students, and I can say feedback for Google Sites. And then I can go ahead and write in my general feedback so that my entire class gets it. Now, that's really helpful when it is fully online learning, virtual learning, but it's also helpful if it's not. Because as much as some of you are going to say, oh, I could just tell them that in class. Great, you should. But a lot of students are going to forget. But if you put it on Google Classroom, it is going to be there forever. And then maybe you tell them it and you also show them it. Right? Go ahead and put that in there because the more areas for them to see the feedback, the better. So those are two ways to provide feedback, but you can also consider adding video feedback. Because of our digital age and because of all the add-ons that we have, and many of you have been using them with Screencastify and Loom and other programs like that, think of how you could add video feedback right there. So I'm going to go back into that app Brainstorm, and I'm going to go back into Aaron's. Now, imagine if instead of writing out my private comment, I give her a video link of myself just very quickly going through her project and saying, here's what I liked, here's what I didn't like, here's how you can grow, so on and so forth. You could do that with students. I did it during digital learning for students' papers and writing assignments where I just pulled up Screencastify, I did a quick video, and I gave them the link to that video. And it was actually quicker than me writing everything down, and it's there for them to look at all the time, and it shows them me going over their actual paper and highlighting things and editing stuff and all of that stuff. So I really like the video feedback option. I think it's quick and it oftentimes will save me time if I'm sticking to like 2 to 5 minutes. And it's something that students might be willing to actually watch instead of read. I know personally when I give comments on papers, a lot of students tend to dismiss them or just skim them over real quick and they don't really change them. But during digital learning, a lot of students were actually watching the video, and some of them were asking me follow-up questions about why something was off or how they could make something better. And it was something that they can keep for their own feedback for future papers. And I just know that my experience with many students is they are more willing to watch something than they are to read something, especially in terms of feedback. So consider adding video feedback. Again, you could add a add-on like Screencastify, where you can just go ahead and click on it and it'll show up here and it'll record anything on your screen and it gives you a link at the end and you just provide your student with that link and make sure the sharing settings are appropriate. You could upload a video to your Google Drive and then share the Google Drive link that way. So it is definitely useful. So consider adding video feedback. Now, one program that is very helpful for digital learning is Google Docs. It seems basic. I'm in Google Docs right now, but it is very helpful, and there are a couple different modes that people should be aware of when they receive a Google Doc in Google Classroom or if somebody shares a Google Doc with them. So here I have Sean Kenny's assignment from early on, which was just a brainstorm, and he submitted it as a Google Doc, right? And he was thinking of different ways to use Google Docs. So when I open it up in Google Classroom, it puts it in this little shell to where I can quickly add a private comment as I did. And I even did a little video link for him to go see. And I put in some text for him to look at. Now, when I'm in here, I don't like the way it looks in the shell because everything is smaller, but when you're in the Google Classroom shell like this, if you go to the right-hand side, you'll see that I'm in suggesting mode. Now, what does that mean? It means anything that I do to his paper right now, to his Google Doc, it's just going to be a suggestion. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click in and let's pretend like he used the wrong there. He didn't, but let's pretend like he did. I wanted to highlight that and delete it, so I'm going to go ahead and backspace, and notice it's telling me to take out that word, and it's in green because it's a suggestion. It's not making the edit for him. It is merely saying, hey, you should look at this and make that change, and maybe I'll change it to that. So it is telling him when he goes into the document that he should cross out and delete that word and replace it with this, but it's not doing it for him. So for a student paper, you might require that they actually go through and they resolve all of these suggestions and they accept them, because they'll actually be notified and they can go down and they can click on this actual section and they can change it, and that's their way of kind of responding to the feedback. But another option is, and again, in that right-hand side, there's more than just suggesting mode. There is also editing mode, meaning you're going to edit the document directly. You're editing it for them. So now I put it in editing mode, just a pencil, and now look what happens. If I delete that word, it is gone, and then I would replace it with this. I've done it for him. Now, that's usually not very helpful in a student setting because you don't want to do the edits for your students. But if you're doing video feedback and you just want to make a quick change for them and tell them about it, you could do that. Or if you're collaborating on a Google document, this is where this comes more in handy. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. And the third option is just viewing, meaning I can't do anything with it. If I'm only in viewing mode, all I can do is look at it. I cannot type anything in it. I am just in viewing. Now, why would that be helpful for a teacher who has assigned the work? Well, I know sometimes for myself, I can accidentally edit or change something that I don't mean to. So if I just want to quickly read it, I might go ahead and put it in viewing mode so that way I can do that. Now, if you are collecting something in Google Classroom like this and you don't like the look of it, what you can do is on the right-hand side, right next to the person's name and the assignment, there's this little arrow button in the side of a square. If you click on that, it's going to bring it up to its actual full document. And I'm going to show you where those same editing and suggesting modes are. It's still on the right-hand side. If you go ahead and click on that, you could suggest, you can edit, or you can view. Now, yes, this is helpful with students, but this is also really helpful with collaborative documents, because if we all wanted to collaborate on one Google Doc right now, but it's one person is the owner and maybe they're asking for some feedback, uh, I probably wouldn't want to make the edits. Maybe I want to suggest something to them because I can put in right here, I can say, what about Word? Right? And I can put in that, and now it adds it as a little suggestion on the right-hand side, and it's telling them to add this. And if he wants to go through, Sean would open up this and see this same comment, and he could either accept it or reject the suggestion. So it could be helpful because maybe he wants to reject it, and then it's going to automatically delete it. So it is good for a collaborative community, and remember, the word collaboration is huge in terms of the Google exam, so it is quite important. So that is adding some feedback within Google Docs as well. Google Docs can be used for feedbacks, especially for editing or suggesting or view only. Now, what I also want to talk about is powering up your feedback, especially with add-ons. There are a ton of add-ons out there. One of them, Screencastify. Like I said, if you want to get an add-on, you could just even Google search Chrome Web Store, and you go ahead, you could go to chrome.google.com as well. And when you're in the Chrome Web Store, these are all the extensions and add-ons that you can get, like Zoom, different messaging stuff, custom cursors, Google Translate, all of that. So let's say I want Screencastify. Right? Screencastify is one that I was talking about. You can search that and you can go ahead and click on it, and mine says remove, yours would say add unless you already have it, and it'll put it up here at your toolbar in the upper right hand corner. Now, some other video ones, one that I really like is Loom, because it will actually tell you when somebody has viewed your video, which is helpful because if you only send the video to one student and you see that you have a view, it means that that student actually watched your video. So you can go ahead and add Loom, which is a video thing. But In Google Docs, there's actually some other helpful ones that I like. And notice when you're in all Google programs, all G Suite tools, there's always a button at the top for add-ons, right? As you can see right now, I'm inside of Google Docs, and there's an add-on button right up at the top. And I can click on that, and I have a bunch of add-ons already here, but if I scroll down to the bottom, you can see something that says Get Add-ons, and you can click that. And these are going to be add-ons specific to that program. So as you can see, there's Easybib. So sometimes I tell my students to install Easybib because it does at least give them some help with formatting. There's one for charts. I don't know what math type is. Some of you math people might need to take a look, but I can go ahead and make that an add-on. Oh, it looks like you could type in formulas and equations. So Aaron, other math teachers, definitely something to look at. Try downloading math type in Google Docs and see if it's helpful. One that I really like is Kaizena. Um, I really like it because it allows me to edit papers and leave voice messages. But again, now that I do video feedback, it's kind of not necessary, but it does store some common comments that I make. I can track skills. So it is helpful if you want to be really robust, something to look at. Now, if you ever run into something where it says app is not whitelisted for install by admin, that just means that you have to contact myself or most likely our IT guy, Eric, in order to give you access to that app because it's not part of our domain, but he could easily add it. So just some things to keep in mind. Add-ons really help. Now, that's just Google Docs. Let's say I went into Google Slides. Notice that if I click on a new Google slide, there is still an add-on button all the way up at the top, kind of near help, and it shows you any add-ons that you have, or you can hit Get Add-ons. Most G Suite tools have that, and it is your easiest way to go ahead and see what they have and just play around with it. See if anything looks good for you. See if anything is going to be interesting for you. I see more math things too. Like here's another one. I don't even know how to say that, so I won't. But a Smart Math Editor. So something to play around with, especially if you are in the math or science programs. So feedback, especially with power-ups, is going to be helpful. Again, my personal favorite is using video. It has been very helpful. Now, briefly, I'm going to transition, and when we're talking about online work, we're also talking about building lessons. You guys have seen what I've done in Google Slides for our own class in terms of using Google Slides for our lessons. So if I pull them up, you'll know kind of how I formatted it, and I've already talked to you about it, where I hyperlink all the lessons, I can have an announcement page, I put objectives, I can put instructions in a video, I can make things and embed videos, I can tell you when there is a Google Classroom assignment, I can add links to different things. That's all fine and good. You are free to edit and adapt that type of format as you want, but some of you might be sitting here thinking, well, I don't really need to do that if we're not going to be fully virtual. And to that, I'd say, consider how you can make your in-class even better, your in-class experience more robust by doing interactive lessons like this, especially if the students have devices in your class. So at the high school level for us, this is still going to be important. So instead of giving them a worksheet, maybe you're giving them an interactive slide. Maybe you're giving them an interactive Google Doc. Maybe you're giving them a Google form to fill out instead of a worksheet or some type of task that you give them. Or as homework assignments, you give that to them. Or just as additional help and support. And for younger grades, you can still assign these things and give them to your students at home without even using Google Classroom. Because again, you know how to share things in Google Drive at this point, and you know how to share things through links. So another option for Google Slides and interactive lessons is consider making it like a choice board. So I'm just going to briefly show you what I might do with something like that. So it's going to look a little crude, but that's okay. So Choice boards, some people really like. It's just adding choice to student assignments. So let's say I'm going to create my own here. I'm going to practice what I just preached before with add-ons. And I have an add-on for Google Slides called Unsplash Images, which just gives me free pictures that I can choose from. And it'll pull up in the right-hand side. And I just want a solid background. So I'm going to search for background, and I'll go ahead and pick the bricks. And it's going to embed it, and it's going to put it right as the image for this slide. It's just taken a while. And here we go. Here's my image. I'm going to exit out of that, and I can go ahead and change and format it how I want. I can add it to the theme. I'm just going to keep it right there. That's fine. Now, if I wanted to, I can go ahead and add some shapes, because if we're making this a choice board, maybe I'm just going to add some shapes. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it a few times. Right there. And I'm going to do this a couple different times. Now, the reason for this is these are all going to end up being clickable. So let's imagine I always like making this white as well, make it pop a little bit more, right? And you could do this however you want. If you Google search Google Slide choice boards, you probably find some that teachers have up on their sites for free. But let's say then I wanted to add some text and say, click here for extra help with, well, apparently I need extra help with spelling. I can then choose this one and say click here for extra help with grammar, and so on and so forth. You get the point. Now, what am I supposed to do with that? Well, I can go ahead and add a hyperlink in here. So I'm going to highlight that whole thing. I'm going to right click, or you can go up at the top and hit insert link, or you can hit Control K. So I'm going to link this, and I can choose, here you go, there's one that's already suggested for me, but if I have help with spelling, I'm going to look up a link for that. readandspell.com looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that link. I'm going to go back into my Google slide, whichever one it was. Here we go, choice board. I have too many tabs open. And I'm going to paste that right in there. And so now it's there. So when a student comes in, if they need extra help with spelling, they know that they could just click on that, and it'll bring them straight here. If they need extra help with grammar, maybe I bring them to Khan Academy, right? Maybe Khan Academy website, right? Khan Academy grammar. I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and I'm going to grab the link, copy the link, go back and highlight all of the text, right click, link, and then paste the link right in there. And so you can do that. Now this looks really simple. You can make it look nicer than that. You really can. You're not bound by anything that I'm doing here. This is just showing you really quickly how you can do that. So that could just be extra help resources. If you want to get even fancier with it, maybe I'll add a new slide. Maybe I'm going to delete those. I'm going to add another image and background. I'm going to search that image. Again, this is Unsplash Photos. It's an add-on for Google Slides, and I'll just click this, and hopefully it comes up pretty quickly. Sometimes it does take a while. Don't be afraid of that. Sometimes if it's not working at all, just choose a different picture because it's not worth your time waiting. So I will choose a different one. And here we go. That one worked. And I like backgrounds like that because it just makes things pop a little bit more. And so let's say now, instead of inserting actual shapes and doing that way, maybe you want to insert tiny pictures, right? You can do that as well. You can insert images from a computer. You can search the web. So I'm going to search the web for work, right? And here you go. There's a picture. And I'm going to insert that image straight into my document. Now, it's going to be too big, right? But I can resize it. So I'm going to make that smaller. and I'm going to put that there. I'm going to insert another image and search the web, and I'll insert there you go, the pen, and I'll insert that. And I'm going to resize that image as well, make it about the same size and space it out. And so what can I do with this? Well, again, I can make these clickable and they can go to different places that I have created to make my work a little bit more interactive. So then maybe I want to tell my students what this page actually is. So I'm going to go to Insert Word Art, and I'm going to say Choice Assignment. And I'm going to put that up there. I'm going to change the color of it. I'll just make it blue. Outline I'll make white. And I'm going to move these down a little bit more. Again, it's very easy because these are draggable. In an insert, I'll insert a text box this time, and I'm going to put it right above because I want to label what these things are for my students. And I'm going to say this will be for, we'll say this assignment is about Beowulf paper. And I like centering things. And I'll move that down there. Then I'm going to insert another text box in front of this, and maybe I'm giving them an option. You can do a Beowulf paper, or you can do a Beowulf video presentation. And I'm going to go ahead and put that there. So the images don't actually have anything to do with that, but it doesn't really matter. You can choose images, or you can make your own images, take your own pictures. Doesn't matter. You could insert anything you want, resize it. And the point of that being, let's imagine I have a Beowulf paper assignment in my Google Drive, and I'll actually create it real quick. I'll go create Google Doc, and I'm going to name it Beowulf paper assignment, and I'm going to say write 100 pages on Beowulf. I would never assign that, but you get the point. Now, since that's already created, if I go back to my choice board that I'm making here, and I click on this image and right click, and then I go to where it says a link, or if you can never find the link when you right click, because sometimes with images it's weird, just remember it's always the paperclip up at the top, or hitting Control K, which is a shortcut. So I'll hit the paperclip up at the top and insert link. I can go ahead and go back to that Google Doc, and I can hit share, and I can grab that link. But remember, the settings need to be appropriate. So this is only people in CCS can use this link, or only people added. So I want to change it to only people in CCS because my students all have CCS email addresses. And I'm going to copy that link, go back to my choice board, and I'm going to paste that in right there and apply. And I could do the same thing if I had instructions for the video presentation. And if I wanted to, if there's a Google Classroom assignment, I can put that image there as well, or I can put that link there. Now, why is this helpful? Well, when my students go into this slideshow, they look at this choice assignment, they could just click on either one, and it takes them straight there. So it can take them straight to those instructions on what they want to do. And that way, when they're at home, they can kind of make the choice for themselves. It makes it visual. It makes it easy for them to know. You could add multiple slides to a choice board. You could make a choice board, like a tic-tac-toe board, and say you need to do 3 in a row, and you always need to do the middle one if you've seen things like that. You can do that as well. One other thing that I like to do is I could create an entire new slide. I'm just going to actually copy this one and paste it, but I'm going to delete these words. Let's say instead what I'm going to do is delete that text. If I don't want it to be just instructions, I want them to actually do something, I can link it to a Google form. I can link either one of these. So instead, maybe I'm putting if you got below a 70 on our last test, click this image for work. And I can say on the other side, and I know there's some typos, if you got above a 70, click here for work. Now, I can then link to different Google Forms, and let's say on this side, I have a Google form that is specifically reteaching material, or maybe a YouTube video. It doesn't really matter what you're linking. The point is here, a student can go into your Google slide and say, okay, I was a person that got below a 70, so I'm going to click on this, and it's going to be differentiating the work based on where they are. So in virtual learning, especially 100% remote learning, this is invaluable. But in an actual physical classroom, this can be helpful as well because you can send kids home with things like this. You can have this up during class if your students have their own Chromebooks and they can be working on different assignments based on their score. And you can, again, it doesn't have to just be below a 70 or above a 70. It can be if you got an A, click here. If you got a B, click here. And it's kind of bringing them and reteaching material if necessary. It's giving them additional help for midterms and finals. This is helpful. And what I would recommend is even if you're in person all the time, is have a Google Slides presentation like this. And you could have one slide throughout and you can just have dates up for when, or dates or weeks, whatever you want to kind of organize it better. And that way a student knows, okay, it is September 12th and here's my work for today. Here's what I have to click on. Again, think for yourself of what you can do in your own classrooms and share your ideas with others and with myself. Because maybe there's things that I do that you wouldn't, and things that you do that I wouldn't even think of. So share it in our Google Classroom stream. But this is one way of adding an interactive element to your classrooms virtually and even physically. Imagine instead of handing out worksheets all the time for homework, you do something like this. And again, you could just be putting a lot of your worksheets online, and that's fine too. Or you can be rethinking the way that you're giving work and assigning work and collecting the work. So that's one way. You could also add interactive lessons with Google Forms. I'm not going to go too in depth into that right now because that is going to be our next lesson, a little bit more on Google Forms and Docs. But I will show you, some of you have been experimenting anyway. Google Forms is a program that allows you to create surveys and tests and stuff like that. And some of you have answered questions already, like this was for our lesson 2 post-assessment check. It was just multiple choice questions, all of that. But what's helpful is when you're creating a Google form, you can make it as a quiz and you could add feedback right away with your answer key, and I could have answer feedback. And if you get the question wrong, I could insert a document or I could insert a video which helps you. So imagine if you're a kid taking a test and or a quiz or a worksheet, whatever, but it's through Google Forms. You just finished, you see that you got a 60. You're not sure why, because normally you have to wait for your teacher to grade it. But now it automatically gives you the grade. And then when you go back into it, you're like, oh, I don't know how I got number 1 wrong. I don't understand. But oh, my teacher left me a video from YouTube, maybe even that the teacher created, doesn't matter, or a document explaining why my answer is incorrect or explaining why my answer is correct. So it's instant feedback, which is very valuable in a classroom. No longer do students have to wait days and days and days or hours for a teacher to grade something. Instead, they could get their feedback instantaneous, which is helpful for formative assessments. So you could do that in Google Forms. You could also do a create your own adventure thing, because in Google Classroom, in Google Forms, excuse me, what you can do is based on a student's answer, you can push them to a different part of the form. And again, I'm going to talk about this more at length later on in the course, but if you want to experiment with that, go ahead and like Google search Google Forms, choose your own adventures, and stuff like that, because sometimes people do storybooks that way as well. And again, what I'm talking about here is if a student were to choose the wrong answer, you could make them go to a point in the form that reteaches it or that asks follow-up questions. You can use Google Forms for self-reflections. You could use Google Forms for course reflections. You could use Google Forms to collect anonymous feedback. You could use Google Forms for a lot of different things. I've even used it to grade student work by just having a form where I can choose the student's paper that I'm looking at, go ahead and choose that student's name, and then I go down and I answer questions, and then I give that data back to the student. So bunch of different ways that you can add interactive lessons. And the third way is Google Docs. Now, Google Docs is cool because just like with all these other G Suite tools, you could add links. And so you can do what's called a Hyperdoc. So I'll even give you an example just by looking it up online. Hyperdoc, Google Docs, and you're going to find a lot of things here. Like even the first one, Flipped Tech Coaching. I'm sure that has great information. Here is a Google site. I'm going to go ahead and click on the Google site one actually. This is an old Google site, but still, it teaches you what Google Docs is. I'm going to go ahead and click on their Hyperdoc samples. And you can create things like this for your students, and it's very helpful because it allows some students kind of choose what they want to learn a little bit, or just helps guide them a little bit more. Well, this page isn't available anymore. So let me click on another one, see if it's available. This is a Hyperdoc gallery wall. All right, so it looks like they used a Padlet, which is another discussion board thing, to kind of put in a lot of people's Hyperdocs. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and just click on one. And these are images, so this isn't too helpful. This isn't what I thought it was going to be, but Padlet is a website that I've used in my class. It's just discussion boards, which is helpful. But if you just search around, you're going to find some Google Docs, Hyperdocs. I'm going to type in samples. Try one more time here. I just had this thought ahead of time. So these looks like it's from Peterson webpage, Hyperdocs tips, templates, a lot of stuff here. I don't see any samples right away, but again, there's a lot of information on Hyperdocs out there. People have been using them for many, many times. Here's elementary sample Hyperdocs. Here we go. Yeah, this works. So this is one example of a Hyperdoc where they have different departments, and you could just click on any one of these and it leads you to another document or another resource. And this could be helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Math, Show What You Know, and this is going to bring me to a different Google Doc, which is another Hyperdoc. Now, what makes this a Hyperdoc? Well, it gives me some instructions here, and if I need some help, I can click here and it'll give me some help to show what I know, and a student would be able to make a copy of this and answer right here. So notice this does look better than a normal worksheet would, so consider researching Hyperdocs. We're going to get into that a little bit more with Google Forms as well, but this is a lot of information thrown at you, but this is just the basics of bringing work online. Even if you're meeting physically, you can still have this as part of your class, and it can help. It adds a little bit more excitement for students. It adds some organization to the course, and it brings things into the 21st century, and is super helpful with feedback and differentiated learning, which Google and G Suite really loves, and on their exam is certainly going to show up. So these are some of the basics of online learning. Again, we've covered Google Classroom and just the basics of how to start a class roster, assigning and sharing work through Google Drive folders, through Google Classroom assignments, leaving feedback on assignments through Google Classroom comments, either private or on the stream. We talked about using video to actually have more feedback on assignments. We went over briefly some Google Docs options when you're giving some feedback. Power upping, if that's even a word, your feedback, especially through video and through other add-ons that you can search, Google Forms, and then also some very, very short basics on adding interactivity into your lessons. So try it. Try adding an interactive lesson right now. Try creating a Hyperdoc for your first unit or for your back to school. You can do it in Google Slides. You can do it in Google Docs or Forms. My recommendation would be Google Slides because it's a little bit more visual, but do what you want. You could even create a back to school choice board. right? Where the students have to click on different things that bring them to one could be a Google form, the next could be some instructions, whatever you want it to be can work. And so those are some basics of online learning and using feedback and videos and all of that stuff to kind of power up your classroom.